Sarah Martinez walked quickly across the marble floor of the Grandview Country Club. Her black shoes made soft sounds on the shiny surface. She carried a heavy tray of empty glasses in her hands. The tray was getting heavier with each step, but Sarah had learned to balance it well over the past 3 years. The dining room was huge. Crystal lights hung from the high ceiling like frozen stars. Each light cost more money than Sarah made in 6 months. She knew this because she had heard Mrs. Wellington talking about it to her friend last week. Mrs. Wellington was one of the club's richest members. She never looked at Sarah when she ordered her food. Tonight was different from other nights. The club was hosting its biggest event of the year. The annual charity gala brought together the wealthiest people in the city. Men wore expensive suits that cost thousands of dollars. Women wore designer dresses that sparkled under the bright lights. Their jewelry caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the walls. Sarah had seen many fancy events during her time at the club. But this one was special. The club had spent months preparing for tonight. Extra flowers filled every corner. The best china came out of storage. Even the regular staff had to dress better than usual. Sarah's uniform was pressed and clean, but it still looked plain next to all the fancy clothes around her. She set the tray down at the service station and looked around the room. About 200 people filled the space. They stood in small groups talking and laughing, their voices mixed together like music. But Sarah was not part of their world. She was just there to serve them food and clean up their messes. In the center of the room stood a beautiful black piano. It was a grand piano, the kind that famous musicians played in concert halls. The wood was so shiny that Sarah could see her reflection in it when she walked by. The piano had been there since the club opened 50 years ago. It was worth more money than most people made in their whole lives. Sarah had always loved that piano. Sometimes, when the dining room was empty, she would walk over and touch the keys very softly. She never played it, though. That would get her fired for sure. The piano was only for special guests and hired musicians. A waitress like her had no business touching such an expensive instrument. But Sarah knew music. She knew it better than most of the people in this room. She had studied piano for 15 years before her life changed completely. Her fingers still remembered how to make beautiful sounds come from piano keys. Her mind still held hundreds of songs that she had learned long ago. The memory of her old life felt like a dream now. When she was younger, Sarah had big plans. She wanted to be a concert pianist. She had the talent for it. Her teachers said she was one of the best students they had ever seen. She could play pieces that made grown people cry. Her music could make a room full of people stop talking and just listen. But dreams cost money, and Sarah's family did not have money. When Sarah was 20 years old, everything changed. Her father got sick and could not work anymore. Her mother tried to take care of him, but she was not strong enough to work full-time too. Sarah had 2 younger brothers who needed food and clothes for school. The family needed money fast. Sarah had to make a choice. She could keep studying music and hope for a scholarship, or she could get a job to help her family. The choice was not really a choice at all. Her family needed her. So Sarah left music school. She took the first job she could find. That job was at the Grandview Country Club. She told herself it would only be for a few months, just until her father got better, just until her brothers were older, just until things got easier. That was 3 years ago. Her father never got better. Her brothers were still in school. Things never got easier, and Sarah was still carrying trays and cleaning tables at the country club. The people at the club did not know about Sarah's past. They saw her as just another worker, someone to bring them food and take away their dirty plates. They never asked her about her life or her dreams. To them, she was invisible. Sarah had learned to be invisible. She moved quietly through the room. She spoke only when spoken to. She smiled when customers were rude to her. She said, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am," even when people treated her badly. It was easier that way. But sometimes, when she walked past the piano, Sarah felt a pain in her chest. It was the pain of missing something she loved, the pain of dreams that had to wait, the pain of music that lived inside her but had nowhere to go. Tonight, the piano would be played by a professional musician. The club had hired someone special, for the gala. The musician was supposed to play background music during dinner. Then later, during the charity auction, he would play special requests for people who gave money to good causes. Sarah had heard the club manager talking about the pianist. He was expensive but worth it. He had played for movie stars and politicians. He was the kind of musician Sarah had once dreamed of becoming. She picked up another tray and walked back into the dining room. The guests were starting to sit down for dinner. Sarah moved between the tables, filling water glasses and bringing bread. She listened to their conversations without meaning to. They talked about their vacation homes and their new cars. They talked about their children's expensive schools and their plans for the summer. Some of them gave more money to charity in one night than Sarah made in a whole year, but they talked about it like it was nothing special. Sarah tried not to feel bitter. These people worked hard for their money too. They had their own problems and worries, and their donations tonight would help many people who needed it. The charity supported music programs in poor schools. Kids who could not afford music lessons would get a chance to learn. That thought made Sarah feel better. Maybe her own dreams had to wait, but other children would get the chances she could not take. Music would still live and grow, even if she could not be part of it right now. The evening moved forward like all the other events Sarah had worked. She served food and cleared plates. She poured wine and brought coffee. The guests laughed and talked and enjoyed themselves. And Sarah stayed invisible, moving through their world without really being part of it. But tonight would be different from all the other nights. Tonight something would happen that would change everything. Sarah did not know it yet, but her invisible life was about to become very visible indeed. The phone in the kitchen rang at exactly 7:30. Sarah was carrying a tray of dessert plates when she heard it. The sound was sharp and urgent, cutting through the noise of the busy kitchen. She could see the club manager, Mr. Thompson, answer it with a big smile on his face. The smile disappeared fast. Sarah watched Mr. Thompson's face change from happy to worried to scared. He started talking faster and louder. Other kitchen staff stopped what they were doing to listen. Something was wrong. "What do you mean, sick?" Mr. Thompson said into the phone. His voice was getting higher. "Tonight? But this is our biggest event of the year." Sarah set down her tray and moved closer. She could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough to understand what was happening. The pianist was not coming. The expensive, famous musician that the club had hired was sick and could not perform. No, Mr. Thompson said. "You don't understand. We have 200 guests out there. Important people. We promised them entertainment. The auction starts in 1 hour and we need music for it." The person on the other end of the phone said something that made Mr. Thompson even more upset. He started pacing back and forth in the small kitchen office. His face was getting red. "I don't care how sick he is," Mr. Thompson said. "Can't he just play a few songs? We'll give him extra money." There was a pause. "What do you mean he's in the hospital?" Sarah felt sorry for Mr. Thompson, but she also felt sorry for the sick musician. Being in the hospital was serious. Music was important, but health was more important. The phone call ended badly. Mr. Thompson slammed the phone down and stared at it like it had betrayed him. Then he started making more phone calls, lots of them. "Hello, this is James Thompson from the Grandview Country Club," he said to the first person. "I need a piano player for tonight. Right now. It's an emergency." Pause. "What do you mean you're booked? Don't you understand this is the Grandview Country Club?" Sarah went back to work, but she kept listening. Mr. Thompson called every musician he could think of, piano players, bands, even a guitar player who said he could try to play piano. But it was Friday night. All the good musicians were already working at other events. The kitchen staff started to whisper among themselves. This was bad. Very bad. The charity auction was the most important part of the evening. Rich people liked to show off by giving money when everyone was watching. But they needed music to make it feel special. Without music, the auction would be boring. Boring auctions made less money for charity. "Maybe we could just play music from the speakers," suggested Maria, one of the other waitresses. "Recorded music?" Mr. Thompson looked like Maria had suggested they serve fast food burgers. This is the Grandview Country Club, not a high school dance. These people expect live music, they expect class. Sarah understood. The guests had paid a lot of money to be here tonight. They expected everything to be perfect. A recorded song from speakers would not feel elegant or special. It would make the club look cheap. Mr. Thompson made more phone calls. He called music schools hoping to find a student who could play. He called other country clubs asking if they could borrow a musician. He even called a wedding band and asked if they could send just their piano player. Nothing worked. Every musician in the city was busy or not good enough or too far away to get there in time. Time was running out. In the dining room, the guests were finishing their dinner. They would expect the auction to start soon. Mr. Thompson was starting to panic. Sarah had never seen him look so worried. "What am I going to tell them?" he said to himself. "How do I explain that we don't have music? Mr. Harrison will have my job for this." Mr. Harrison was the club's owner. He was a scary man who expected everything to be perfect all the time. Sarah had seen him fire people for much smaller mistakes than this. The kitchen fell quiet except for the sounds of dishes being washed. Everyone felt bad for Mr. Thompson. He was not always the nicest boss, but he worked hard to make the club successful. This was not his fault, but he would get blamed for it anyway. Sarah kept working, but her mind was thinking about the problem. She imagined the disappointed faces of the guests when they learned there would be no music. She thought about all the money that the charity would lose because the auction would not be as exciting. But mostly, she thought about the piano. The beautiful black piano sitting in the dining room with no one to play it. It seemed wrong somehow. Like having a bird with no one to hear it sing. Sarah had walked past that piano thousands of times in the past 3 years. She had touched its keys when no one was looking. She had imagined what it would feel like to really play it, to make music that filled the whole room. She knew she could play it. Even after 3 years away from music, her fingers still remembered how to move. Her mind still held all the songs she had learned. She could play classical music, popular songs, anything the guests might want to hear. But she was just a waitress. No one would let a waitress play for such important people. The idea was crazy. Or was it? Sarah looked around the kitchen. Mr. Thompson was still making phone calls, but he was running out of numbers to try. The other staff members were getting ready to go back to work. Soon, someone would have to go out and tell the guests that there would be no music tonight. Sarah thought about her family, her sick father who needed medicine, her mother who worked 2 jobs but still struggled to pay the bills, her brothers who deserved to have nice things sometimes. Sarah needed this job. If she did something stupid and got fired, her family would suffer. But she also thought about all the people who would be helped by the charity money, kids who wanted to learn music but could not afford lessons. They were like Sarah had been when she was young, full of dreams but without the money to make them come true. Maybe this was not about Sarah at all. Maybe this was about helping others, about making sure the auction raised as much money as possible for the charity. Sarah took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking a little, but her mind was clear. She walked over to where Mr. Thompson was standing. He was getting ready to make another phone call. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said quietly. He looked up at her with tired, frustrated eyes. "Not now, Sarah. I'm trying to solve a crisis here." "I know," Sarah said. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. I think I can help." Mr. Thompson stared at her like she had grown a second head. "Help? Sarah, unless you know a piano player who can be here in the next 20 minutes, I don't see how you can help." Sarah's heart was beating fast. Once she said the words, there would be no taking them back. Everything would change. "I can play piano," she said. The kitchen went completely quiet. Even the dishwasher stopped working to listen. Mr. Thompson's mouth fell open. "You can what?" "I can play piano," Sarah repeated. "I studied music for 15 years. I can play classical, popular, whatever you need. I can do the auction music." Mr. Thompson looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. In his mind, Sarah was just a waitress. The idea that she could be anything else seemed impossible. "Sarah," he said slowly, "this is not the time for jokes." "I'm not joking," Sarah said. "I really can play. I'm good at it." The other staff members were staring at Sarah now. Some looked surprised. Others looked doubtful. Maria shook her head like Sarah had lost her mind. Mr. Thompson studied Sarah's face. He was trying to figure out if she was telling the truth or if the stress of the evening had made her crazy. "Even if you can play," he said finally, "these are very important people out there. They expect professional quality music. This is not a talent show." Sarah felt a flash of hurt, but she pushed it down. She understood why he doubted her. In his experience, waitresses did not play concert piano. But tonight, everything was different. Tonight, the impossible had to become possible. Sarah looked straight into Mr. Thompson's eyes. She had never spoken to him like this before. Usually she just said, "Yes, sir," and did what he asked. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had to make him understand. "I went to Juilliard," Sarah said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the kitchen stopped what they were doing. Juilliard was the most famous music school in America. Only the best musicians in the world got to study there. Mr. Thompson's eyebrows went up. "Juilliard? The music school in New York?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I studied piano there for 2 years. I was on a partial scholarship. My teachers said I had real talent. They thought I could have a career as a concert pianist." Maria dropped the plate she was holding. It crashed to the floor, but no one looked at it. They were all staring at Sarah like they had never seen her before. "You went to Juilliard," Mr. Thompson said slowly, "and now you're working here as a waitress." It was not a question. It was a statement that showed how crazy the world could be sometimes. People who went to Juilliard became famous musicians. They played in concert halls and made albums. They did not carry trays in country clubs. Sarah nodded. "I had to leave school when my father got sick. My family needed money right away. I was going to go back to finish my degree, but..." She stopped talking and looked at the floor. Life got in the way. The story came out slowly. Sarah told them about her father's illness and how expensive his medicine was. She told them about her mother trying to work 2 jobs but still not making enough money. She told them about her brothers who needed clothes and school supplies. "I was supposed to be the one who made it," Sarah said. "My parents saved money for years to help pay for my music lessons. They believed in me. But when everything went wrong, I had to choose between my dreams and my family." Mr. Thompson listened without saying anything. He was starting to understand why a Juilliard student might end up working as a waitress. Sometimes good people had to make hard choices. "That was 3 years ago," Sarah continued. "I kept telling myself it was just temporary, that I would go back to music someday. But every month my family needed the money I made here. Every month going back to school seemed more impossible." The kitchen was completely quiet now. Even the sounds from the dining room seemed far away. Sarah's story was the kind that made people think about their own lives and their own choices. "So you haven't played piano in 3 years?" Mr. Thompson asked. "I practice sometimes," Sarah said. "There's an old piano at the community center where my mother volunteers. When it's empty, I go there and play, just to remember what it feels like." She did not tell them about the nights when she sat at that old piano and cried. She did not tell them about the songs that still lived in her heart, but had nowhere to go. She did not tell them about the dreams that felt more distant every day. "But Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, "I still remember how to play. Music doesn't leave you just because you stop performing it. It stays inside you, waiting." Mr. Thompson was thinking hard. Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes, but she could also see something else. Hope, maybe. Desperation, definitely. "Even if you can play," he said, "you've never performed for people like this. These guests expect perfection. They're used to hearing professional musicians who have played at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm scared too. But I also know that without any music, the auction will fail. The charity will lose money. Kids won't get the music programs they need." That was the truth that changed everything. This was not about Sarah's dreams or Mr. Thompson's job. This was about helping people who needed help. Mr. Thompson looked at his watch. The auction was supposed to start in 30 minutes. He had no other choices left. Every musician in the city was busy or too far away. "What kind of music can you play?" he asked. Sarah felt a little spark of hope. He was actually considering it. "I can play classical music," she said. Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Beethoven. I can also play popular songs and jazz standards. I can read music or I can play by ear. Whatever the guests request, I can probably play it. Mr. Thompson was still thinking. Sarah could see him imagining what would happen if he said yes. If Sarah was really good, she might save the evening. If she was not good enough, it would be a disaster. The guests don't know you, he said. They'll see a waitress sitting at the piano. Some of them might be offended. Sarah had thought about this too. She knew that some of the guests might not like seeing her play. They were used to thinking of her as invisible. Suddenly, being the center of attention would be strange for everyone. Maybe you could introduce me differently, Sarah suggested. You don't have to say I'm a waitress, you could just say I'm a musician who's helping out because of the emergency. It was not exactly a lie. Sarah was a musician, even if she had not been able to work as one. And she really was helping out because of an emergency. Mr. Thompson looked around the kitchen. The other staff members were waiting to see what he would decide. Some of them looked excited, others looked worried. What if you freeze up? He asked. What if you get up there and can't play because you're too nervous? Sarah had wondered about this too. It had been a long time since she had performed for other people. The community center piano was one thing. Playing for 200 rich people was completely different. I might be nervous, Sarah admitted, but I won't freeze up. Music is like breathing for me. Even when I'm scared, I can still play. She thought about all the recitals she had performed when she was younger. Yes, she had been nervous then too. But once her fingers touched the piano keys, the nervousness always went away. The music took over and everything else disappeared. Mr. Thompson was running out of time to decide. In the dining room, the guests were probably wondering when the entertainment would start. Soon someone would have to make an announcement. If I let you do this, he said slowly, and it goes badly, we'll both probably lose our jobs. Sarah nodded. She understood the risk, but she also understood something else. Sometimes you had to take big risks to help other people. Sometimes you had to be brave even when you were scared. And if I don't do this, Sarah said, the auction will definitely go badly. At least, this way, we have a chance. Mr. Thompson looked at her for a long moment. He was seeing her differently now, not just as a waitress who carried trays and cleaned tables, but as a person with talents and dreams and a story that mattered. You really think you can do this? He asked. Sarah thought about her father, who always told her to use her gifts to help others. She thought about her mother, who still believed that Sarah would find her way back to music someday. She thought about her brothers, who deserved to have a sister they could be proud of. Yes, she said. I really think I can do this. Mr. Thompson took a deep breath. Okay, he said. Let's try it. The kitchen erupted in whispers and excited voices. Maria grabbed Sarah's hand and squeezed it. The other waitresses looked at her with new respect. Even the cooks were smiling. But Sarah felt a wave of fear wash over her. Suddenly, the idea that had seemed so right a few minutes ago seemed crazy again. She was about to walk into a room full of the most important people in the city and sit down at their expensive piano. What should I wear? She asked. Her waitress uniform would definitely not work for a piano performance. Mr. Thompson thought for a moment. Mrs. Henderson from the office has a black dress here for emergencies. It should fit you. And Sarah? He looked at her seriously. Don't tell anyone you work here until after you play. Let them judge your music before they judge anything else. Sarah nodded. That made sense. If the guests knew she was a waitress, they might not listen to her music with open minds. As she walked toward the office to change clothes, Sarah felt like she was walking toward a new life. In a few minutes, she would either fulfill a dream she had almost forgotten, or she would fail in front of everyone who mattered in her city. Either way, she would never be invisible again. Sarah stood outside the dining room door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. Mrs. Henderson's black dress fit her perfectly, but it felt strange. For 3 years, she had worn her waitress uniform in this building. Now she was dressed like a guest, about to walk into their world as an equal. Through the small window in the door, she could see the guests. They were sitting at their tables, talking and laughing after dinner. Wine glasses caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. Everything looked normal and peaceful. They had no idea what was about to happen. Mr. Thompson appeared beside her. He had combed his hair and straightened his tie. He looked nervous but determined. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded, but she was not sure if she was telling the truth. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were cold and sweaty at the same time. She had performed in recitals before, but never for people like this. Never when so much was at stake. "Remember," Mr. Thompson said, "I'm going to introduce you as Sarah Martinez, a talented pianist who's helping us out tonight. I won't mention that you work here. Just focus on the music." Sarah took a deep breath. What if they don't like it? What if I'm not good enough? Mr. Thompson looked at her seriously. "Sarah, there's no piano player in the world who's good enough. For some of these people, they complain about everything. But most of them do appreciate real talent when they hear it. Just play from your heart and let the music speak for itself." That was good advice, but it did not make Sarah feel less nervous. She thought about all the famous musicians who had probably played for crowds like this. People who had studied at the best schools and performed in the best concert halls. How could a waitress from the kitchen compete with that? But then she remembered why she was doing this. This was not about competing with anyone. This was about helping the charity raise money. This was about making sure that other kids could have the music education that Sarah had lost. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." Mr. Thompson opened the door, and they walked into the dining room together. The sounds of conversation and laughter surrounded them. Sarah had been in this room thousands of times, but it felt completely different now. The light seemed brighter. The faces seemed more important. The piano in the center of the room looked bigger and more intimidating. Mr. Thompson walked to the small stage where the microphone was set up. Sarah followed behind him, trying to look confident even though her legs felt weak. She could feel people starting to notice them. Conversations were getting quieter. Eyes were turning in their direction. Mr. Thompson tapped the microphone to make sure it was working. The sound echoed through the room and got everyone's attention. The talking stopped almost completely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Thompson said, into the microphone. "Thank you for joining us for this wonderful evening. Before we begin our charity auction, I have an announcement to make." Sarah stood next to the piano, trying to look calm. She could see faces in the crowd now. Mrs. Wellington was sitting at a table near the front wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than Sarah's family made in 5 years. Mr. Harrison, the club owner, was at another table looking serious as always. "Our scheduled pianist for this evening has become ill and cannot perform," Mr. Thompson continued. "However, we are very fortunate to have Sarah Martinez here with us tonight. Sarah is a very talented pianist who has graciously agreed to provide our music for the auction." The room was completely quiet now. 200 pairs of eyes were looking at Sarah. She felt like she was standing under a spotlight, even though the lighting had not changed. Some of the guests looked curious. Others looked doubtful. A few looked annoyed that their entertainment was being provided by someone they had never heard of. Sarah walked toward the piano bench. Each step felt like it took forever. She could hear the click of her shoes on the marble floor. She could feel the expensive fabric of the borrowed dress moving around her legs. She could sense the weight of all those watching eyes. When she reached the piano, she stopped for a moment. The instrument was even more beautiful up close. The black wood was so shiny she could see her own reflection in it. The keys were perfectly white and black, waiting for someone to bring them to life. Sarah thought about all the times she had walked past this piano while carrying trays and cleaning tables. All the times she had dreamed about what it would feel like to actually play it. Now the dream was becoming real, but it felt more like a nightmare. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it to the right height. The cushion was soft and comfortable. Her feet found the pedals easily. Her hands hovered over the keys, not quite touching them yet. The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear people breathing. She could hear the soft clink of jewelry when someone moved. She could hear the hum of the air conditioning. But mostly she could hear her own heart beating fast and loud. Some of the guests were whispering to each other now. Sarah could not hear what they were saying, but she could guess. They were wondering who she was and whether she would be any good. They were probably disappointed that they were not getting the famous pianist they had been promised. At a table near the back, Sarah saw a man in an expensive suit lean over to his wife and say something that made her frown. Sarah's cheeks got hot. She was pretty sure they were not saying nice things about her. Mrs. Wellington was studying Sarah through her gold reading glasses. Her expression was cold and doubtful. She clearly did not think much of this unknown pianist who had appeared out of nowhere. Mr. Harrison was checking his watch and looking impatient. He had paid a lot of money for a professional musician, and instead he was getting someone he had never heard of. Sarah knew that if this went badly, Mr. Thompson would lose his job. Maybe she would lose hers too. The microphone was still on, and Sarah could hear her own nervous breathing echoing through the room. She needed to start playing soon, or the awkward silence would become unbearable. But what should she play first? Something classical and impressive? Something popular that everyone would recognize? Something safe and easy, or something that would show off her real skills? Sarah's mind went blank for a moment. All the songs she knew seemed to disappear from her memory. The piano keys looked foreign and scary. Her hands felt clumsy and uncertain. Then she remembered something her first piano teacher had told her many years ago. "When you're nervous," Mrs. Chen had said, "don't think about the people listening. Don't think about making mistakes. Just think about the music. Let the music take you where it wants to go." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She thought about why she had started playing piano in the first place. It was not to impress anyone or to make money. It was because music made her feel complete. It was because when she played, she could express feelings that had no words. She opened her eyes and looked at the keys. They did not look scary anymore. They looked like old friends who had been waiting patiently for her to come back. Sarah placed her fingers on the keys. The room held its breath. In a few seconds, everyone would know whether she was really a musician or just a waitress who was about to embarrass herself. The moment of truth had arrived. There was no going back now. Sarah pressed down on the first keys and the sound of music filled the elegant room. Her 3-year wait was over. The silent piano had found its voice again. And Sarah Martinez, the invisible waitress, was about to become visible in a way she had never imagined. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and gentle. Sarah had chosen to start with Clair de Lune by Debussy, a piece that always made her feel calm. Her fingers moved across the keys like they were coming home after a long journey. The tear sound was perfect. The piano had been tuned recently and every note rang clear and true. Sarah felt the familiar magic that happened when her hands touched piano keys. All her nervousness began to melt away. The worried voices in her head got quiet. There was only the music, but the guests in the dining room were not quiet. Sarah could hear whispers and murmurs. Some people sounded surprised. Others sounded skeptical. She tried not to listen to their voices and focus only on the melody flowing from her fingers. The opening of Clair de Lune was simple and peaceful. It was the kind of music that made people think of moonlight on water or a gentle breeze through trees. Sarah played it exactly the way she had learned it years ago, with feeling and grace. As the piece continued, something interesting started to happen. The whispers in the room got quieter. People stopped talking to each other and started listening to the music instead. The notes were too beautiful to ignore. Sarah's confidence grew with each measure. Her fingers remembered exactly where to go. Her hands moved together perfectly, creating harmony and melody at the same time. 3 years away from performing had not hurt her skills at all. If anything, she played with more emotion now than she had when she was younger. When Clair de Lune ended, there was a moment of complete silence. Then slowly, applause began. It was not the polite clapping that people do just to be nice. It was real appreciation for something beautiful. Sarah looked up at the audience for the first time since she had started playing. Many of the faces looked different now. The doubt was gone from some eyes. Instead, she saw surprise and interest. Mrs. Wellington was no longer frowning. Even Mr. Harrison looked less impatient. But Sarah was just getting started. She moved smoothly into her next piece without stopping. This time she chose something more challenging, Chopin's Revolutionary Etude. This piece was fast and dramatic, full of passion and power. It would show the guests what she could really do. The Revolutionary Etude began with a thundering run of notes in the left hand, like an army marching into battle. Sarah's left hand flew across the lower keys while her right hand played the stirring melody above. The music filled the entire room, reaching every corner and touching every heart. This was not background music anymore. This was music that demanded attention. People could not talk over it or ignore it. They had to listen whether they wanted to or not. Sarah played with 3 years of stored-up emotion. All the dreams she had pushed aside, all the music she had kept locked inside her heart, all the passion that had nowhere to go. It all came pouring out through her fingers and into the room. The difficult passages that had taken her months to learn when she was a student came easily now. Her fingers moved faster than thought, hitting every note perfectly. The dynamic changes were dramatic. Soft whispers that made people lean forward, followed by powerful chords that made them sit back in amazement. By the time she reached the climax of the piece, the entire room was completely silent except for the music. No one was talking. No one was moving. Even the waiters who were supposed to be clearing tables had stopped to listen. When the Revolutionary Etude ended with its final, decisive chord, the applause was much stronger than before. Some people were actually clapping hard, like they were at a real concert. Sarah saw several guests exchange looks of surprise and approval. She decided to try something different for her third piece. Instead of another classical work, she moved into a jazz arrangement of The Way You Look Tonight. This would show the guests that she could play many different styles of music. Jazz was different from classical music. It was more relaxed and playful. Sarah's fingers danced across the keys, adding little decorations and personal touches to the melody. She played around with the rhythm, sometimes speeding up, sometimes slowing down, making the familiar song sound fresh and new. The guests seemed to appreciate this change of style. Jazz was easier to listen to while they finished their wine and prepared for the auction. But it was still sophisticated music, the kind that belonged in a place like the Grandview Country Club. Sarah could feel herself relaxing more with each song. The piano felt like an old friend under her hands. The music felt natural and right. She had almost forgotten how good it felt to perform, to share her gift with other people. For her fourth piece, she chose Bach's Prelude in C major. This was a piece that many people knew, even if they did not know classical music well. It was simple but beautiful, elegant but not showy. It was the perfect music for elegant people in an elegant room. As she played the familiar Bach Prelude, Sarah noticed that more and more people were watching her instead of talking to each other. Some guests had turned their chairs to face the piano. Others were leaning forward at their tables, paying close attention to every note. At one table, she saw a distinguished older man with gray hair talking quietly to his companion. He kept nodding toward the piano and smiling. At another table, a woman in a blue evening gown was recording the music on her phone. But the most important change was in Mr. Thompson's face. When Sarah looked toward where he was standing, she saw relief and amazement. His plan was working. The music was saving the evening. Sarah decided to take a small risk with her next piece. She chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, one of the most difficult and dramatic pieces in the classical piano repertoire. This was music that only very skilled pianists could play well. The piece began with 3 powerful, ominous chords that seemed to shake the room. Then came the haunting melody, played with both hands in perfect unison. This was music that told a story of struggle and triumph, of darkness and light. The technical demands of the Rachmaninoff piece were enormous. Sarah's hands had to stretch across wide intervals. Her fingers had to move with lightning speed and perfect accuracy. The dynamic changes were extreme, from whispers to thunders, but Sarah played it flawlessly. Every note was clear and precisely timed. Every phrase was shaped with musical intelligence and emotional depth. She played like someone who had been performing professionally for years, not like someone who had been carrying trays for the past 3 years. When the piece ended, the applause was the strongest yet. Some people were actually standing up as they clapped. Sarah saw genuine amazement on many faces. These people knew good music when they heard it, and they were hearing something special. Mr. Harrison, the club owner, was nodding his approval. Mrs. Wellington was smiling for the first time all evening. Even the kitchen staff who had gathered near the service doors to listen were beaming with pride. Sarah felt a joy she had almost forgotten. This was why she had started playing music in the first place. Not for money or fame, but for moments like this. Moments when music brought people together and made them feel something beautiful. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was no longer hiding her talents or apologizing for her dreams. She was a musician again, sharing her gift with the world, and the best was yet to come. The auction was about to begin, and Sarah was ready to help make it the most successful charity event the Grandview Country Club had ever seen. The change in the room was like watching the sun come up after a long, dark night. When Sarah had first sat down at the piano, many guests had looked annoyed or bored. Now they were looking at her like she was a miracle. Mrs. Wellington, who had never said more than "water, no ice" to Sarah in 3 years, was staring at her with wide eyes. Her mouth was slightly open, like she could not believe what she was hearing. The diamond necklace around her neck caught the light as she leaned forward to listen more carefully. At the table nearest to the piano, an elderly man with a white mustache was wiping tears from his eyes. The Rachmaninoff piece had moved him, deeply. He turned to his wife and said something that made her nod and smile. They both looked at Sarah with the kind of respect usually saved for famous artists. Mr. Harrison had stopped checking his watch. Instead, he was watching Sarah's hands move across the keys with fascination. As the owner of the club, he had heard many professional musicians perform in this room. But he had never seen anything quite like this, a complete unknown playing with the skill of a concert master. The younger guests were pulling out their phones to record videos. Sarah could see the screens lighting up around the room as people captured her performance. Some were posting to social media in real time. Others were sending messages to friends, probably telling them about the amazing pianist they were discovering. But the most dramatic change was in the energy of the room itself. Before Sarah started playing, the evening had felt formal and a little stiff. People were being polite to each other, but there was no real excitement. Now the air felt electric. Everyone was sharing the same amazing experience. Sarah finished the Rachmaninoff and moved smoothly into a medley of Broadway show tunes. She played songs from famous musicals that many people in the room would recognize. Memory from Cats, Send in the Clowns from A Little Night Music, and The Way We Were from the movie with Barbra Streisand. These songs were different from the classical pieces she had been playing. They were more emotional and personal. Each one told a story that people could relate to. As Sarah played Memory, she noticed several people singing along quietly under their breath. The Broadway medley was smart strategy. It showed that Sarah was not just a classical pianist. She could play popular music too. She could adapt to what the audience wanted to hear. This made her seem more approachable and versatile. A waiter who had been standing near the kitchen door walked over to Mr. Thompson and whispered something in his ear. Mr. Thompson smiled and nodded. Later, Sarah would learn that the waiter had said the kitchen staff was gathering around the service doors to listen. Even the dishwashers had stopped, working to hear her play. At a table near the back of the room, a middle-aged woman in a red dress was crying quietly. The music was bringing back memories for her, maybe of someone she had loved or a time in her life when she had been very happy. Her husband handed her a tissue and squeezed her hand gently. Sarah could feel the connection between herself and the audience growing stronger with each song. This was what real performing was about. It was not just playing notes correctly. It was touching people's hearts and making them feel something important. As she moved into her next piece, Sarah noticed that several guests had moved their chairs closer to the piano. They wanted to see her hands and watch her technique up close. A few people were even standing at the edge of the performance area, like they were at a concert instead of a dinner party. One of these people was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair. Sarah did not know it yet, but this was Dr. Robert Chen, the dean of the music department at the local university. He had been studying Sarah's technique and was amazed by what he saw. Dr. Chen turned to the woman standing next to him and said quietly, "She has Juilliard-level training, maybe even better. Listen to her phrasing, her dynamics. This is not amateur playing." The woman next to him was Linda Morrison, a talent agent who represented several well-known classical musicians. She had come to the gala as a guest, not expecting to discover new talent, but she was taking careful notes on her phone about Sarah's performance. "Where did she come from?" Linda whispered back to Dr. Chen. "I've never heard of her before." Neither of them knew that just 2 hours ago Sarah had been serving their dinner and clearing their plates. To them, she was a mysterious new talent who had appeared from nowhere. At another table, James Rodriguez, a music producer who had worked with some of the biggest names in the classical music world, was having a similar conversation with his wife. "Honey," he said quietly, "we need to talk to her after the performance. This level of talent doesn't come along very often." His wife nodded. She had been in the music business long enough to recognize something special when she heard it. Meanwhile, Sarah was completely focused on her playing. She had chosen Chopin's Minute Waltz for her next piece, a playful and technically challenging work that would showcase her lighter side. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision and joy. The Minute Waltz was like musical laughter. It bubbled and sparkled and made people smile. After the emotional weight of some of her earlier pieces, this was exactly what the room needed. People began to relax and enjoy themselves in a new way. Sarah could see smiles spreading across faces throughout the room. Some people were actually swaying slightly to the rhythm of the waltz. The music was infectious and happy, and it was impossible not to feel good while listening to it. When the waltz ended, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. But more than that, Sarah heard something she had not expected. People calling, out requests. "Play some Gershwin," someone called from the back of the room. "Do you know any Mozart?" asked a woman at a front table. "What about some jazz?" suggested another guest. These people were no longer sitting politely and waiting for background music. They were engaged and excited. They wanted to hear more, and they wanted to participate in choosing what came next. Sarah smiled and nodded. "I'd be happy to take requests," she said into the microphone. "What would you like to hear?" The response was immediate. Multiple people called out suggestions at the same time. Sarah heard requests for everything from classical composers to popular songs to movie themes. Everyone wanted to hear their favorite music played by this incredible pianist they had just discovered. Mr. Thompson watched all of this with growing amazement. He had hoped that Sarah would be good enough to provide acceptable background music. He had never imagined that she would become the star of the evening. The charity auction was supposed to start soon, but nobody seemed to care about the schedule anymore. They were too busy enjoying the unexpected concert they were receiving. Sarah chose Rhapsody in Blue by Gershwin for her next piece. It was a perfect choice because it combined classical technique with jazz sensibility. It was also a piece that many people loved, even if they did not usually listen to classical music. As the familiar opening clarinet glissando flowed from the piano, Sarah played both the orchestral and piano parts, switching between them seamlessly. The room erupted in appreciative murmurs. This was a piece that made people feel proud to be American. It was sophisticated but accessible, complex but enjoyable. Sarah played Rhapsody in Blue with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling again. Every note was a declaration that she was not just a waitress who happened to play piano. She was a pianist who happened to be working as a waitress. By the time she finished the Gershwin, the transformation of the room was complete. These same people who had ignored Sarah for 3 years were now looking at her like she was the most important person in the building. And in that moment she was. As the last notes of Rhapsody in Blue faded away, Sarah looked up to see something that took her breath away. The entire room was standing and applauding, not just polite clapping, but real, enthusiastic applause. Some people were actually cheering. Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was not the time to cry. This was the time to be professional and gracious. She stood up from the piano bench and gave a small bow, just like she had been taught to do in her student recitals. "Thank you," she said into the microphone. "It's been my pleasure to play for you tonight." But the applause did not stop. If anything, it got louder. People were calling out, "Bravo!" and more. Some guests were actually whistling their appreciation, something that never happened at formal events like this. Mr. Thompson appeared beside the piano, his face glowing with relief and pride. He had taken a huge risk by letting Sarah perform, and it had paid off better than he could have dreamed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, "wasn't that absolutely wonderful? Let's give Sarah Martinez another round of applause." The crowd responded enthusiastically, but as the clapping finally began to die down, something unexpected happened. Instead of returning to their seats to begin the auction, several people started walking toward the piano. The first person to reach Sarah was Dr. Robert Chen, the university music dean. He was moving quickly, like he was afraid someone else might get to her first. "Miss Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "That was absolutely extraordinary. I'm Dr. Robert Chen from the university. I need to speak with you." Before Sarah could respond, another person appeared at her side. It was Linda Morrison, the talent agent. She was holding out her business card with a big smile on her face. "Sarah, I'm Linda Morrison. I represent classical musicians professionally. Where have you been hiding? That performance was incredible." Sarah looked back and forth between the two of them, confused. She was not used to people fighting for her attention. For 3 years, she had been practically invisible. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to her. More people were approaching. James Rodriguez, the music producer, was making his way through the small crowd that was forming around the piano. Behind him, Sarah could see other guests getting up from their tables, all wanting to meet the mysterious pianist who had appeared out of nowhere. I'm sorry," Sarah said, feeling overwhelmed. "I don't understand what's happening." Dr. Chen smiled kindly. "What's happening is that you've just given one of the finest piano performances I've heard in years. Your technique, your musicality, your emotional depth, it's all at a professional level. Where did you study?" Sarah hesitated. She was not sure if she should tell them the truth about working at the club. Mr. Thompson had told her to let people judge her music first before they knew anything else about her. "I studied at Juilliard," she said quietly, "but I had to leave before I finished my degree." Linda Morrison's eyes widened. "Juilliard? I knew it. You can't fake that level of training. Sarah, I have to ask, are you currently performing professionally? Do you have representation?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I haven't performed in public for 3 years." 3 years? Dr. Chen looked shocked. "But why? With talent like yours, you should be performing regularly. You should be recording albums and giving concerts." This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. She would have to explain why someone with her abilities was not already famous. She would have to tell them about her family and her choices and her struggles. But before she could answer, James Rodriguez reached the group. He introduced himself and immediately started talking about recording opportunities and concert bookings. More people were gathering around them. Everyone wanted to know about Sarah's background and her future plans. Sarah felt like she was in a dream. Just 2 hours ago, she had been worried about losing her job for suggesting that she could play piano. Now she was surrounded by important people in the music industry, all wanting to help her career. But the most surprising moment came when Mrs. Wellington approached the group. Sarah had served this woman hundreds of times, but Mrs. Wellington had never really looked at her before. Now she was walking straight towards Sarah with a determined expression. "Excuse me," Mrs. Wellington said to the group of music industry people. "I need to speak with Miss Martinez." The others stepped back respectfully. Mrs. Wellington was one of the most powerful people in the city. When she wanted to talk, people listened. Mrs. Wellington looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "My dear," she said, "that was the most beautiful music I've heard since my late husband used to play for me. He was a pianist too, you know. Not as talented as you, but he loved music the way you do. Sarah was stunned. In 3 years of serving Mrs. Wellington, she had never heard her mention her husband or speak so personally about anything. "Thank you," Sarah managed to say. "That means a lot to me." Mrs. Wellington reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "I want to do something to help your career. Music like yours should not be hidden from the world." She wrote out a check and handed it to Sarah. When Sarah looked at the amount, she almost dropped it. The check was for $50,000. "Wellington," Sarah gasped, "I can't accept this, it's too much." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wellington said firmly. "Consider it a scholarship. Use it to finish your education or to make a recording or whatever you need to get your career started. Talent like yours is a gift, and gifts should be shared." Other people in the group began reaching for their own checkbooks. Dr. Chen was writing something on the back of his business card. Linda Morrison was making phone calls to colleagues in New York. James Rodriguez was talking about studio time and recording contracts. Sarah looked around at all these faces, all these people, who wanted to help her. Just hours ago, most of them had not even known she existed. Now they were treating her like she was the most important person in the room. "I don't know what to say," Sarah said, tears finally starting to flow down her cheeks. "This is all so overwhelming." Dr. Chen smiled gently. "Sarah, what we're trying to tell you is that you have a gift that should not be wasted. Whatever circumstances led you to stop performing, we want to help you overcome them. The university would be honored to offer you a full scholarship to complete your degree," he continued. "Full tuition, plus a living stipend. You could even teach some of our beginning students to help support yourself." Linda Morrison nodded enthusiastically. "And I already have ideas for performance opportunities. There are several summer music festivals that would love to feature a talent like yours. We could have you performing professionally within months." Sarah felt like she was spinning. Everything was happening so fast. 3 years of struggle and sacrifice, and now suddenly her whole life could change in one evening. But then she thought about her family. Her father, who was still sick. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs. Her brothers, who needed her help. Even with all these generous offers, she could not just abandon her responsibilities. "You're all so kind," Sarah said slowly, "but you don't understand my situation. I have a family that depends on me. I can't just go back to school or start traveling for concerts. I have obligations." Mrs. Wellington smiled. "My dear child, did you not look at that check? That's enough money to support your family while you pursue your music. And I'm sure I'm not the only one here who would be willing to help." She was right. Other guests were already writing checks and making pledges. Someone suggested starting a foundation to support Sarah's career and help other young musicians from difficult circumstances. The conversation was moving faster than Sarah could follow. Mr. Thompson, who had been watching all of this from a distance, finally approached the group. He looked nervous but determined. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I think there's something you should all know about Sarah." Sarah's heart stopped. This was it. Mr. Thompson was going to tell them that she was just a waitress. Once they knew the truth, would all these offers disappear? "Sarah has been working here at the club for 3 years, Mr. Thompson said. "She's been one of our best employees, hardworking, reliable, always professional. But until tonight, none of us knew about her musical background." The group turned to look at Sarah with even more amazement. A waitress? They had thought she was a professional musician who had been keeping a low profile. The truth was even more incredible. "You mean you've been working here all this time and nobody knew you could play like that?" Linda Morrison asked. Sarah nodded, feeling embarrassed. "I needed the job. My family needed the money. I didn't think anyone would care about my music background." Dr. Chen shook his head in wonder. "Sarah, this makes your story even more remarkable. To maintain that level of skill while working a demanding job, to keep your passion alive despite the circumstances, that shows incredible dedication. And it shows character," Mrs. Wellington added. "You put your family's needs before your own dreams. That's the mark of a truly fine person." The crowd around the piano was growing larger. Word was spreading through the room about Sarah's background and her amazing performance. People who had missed parts of her concert were asking others to describe what they had heard. Sarah realized that this moment was changing everything, not just for her, but for everyone in the room. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, wearing an elegant black concert dress. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. They were shaking from excitement. In just a few minutes, she would walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world and play for an audience of music lovers who had come specifically to hear her. The journey from that night at the Grandview Country Club to this moment had been like living in a fairy tale. Everything had changed so quickly that sometimes Sarah had trouble believing it was real. The first change had come just days after the charity gala. Dr. Chen had called to confirm the university's scholarship offer, but it was even better than he had first described. Not only would Sarah get free tuition and a living stipend, but the university was creating a special program that would allow her to complete her degree while also teaching and performing. Linda Morrison had been equally busy. Within a week, she had arranged for Sarah to audition for several prestigious music festivals. The auditions had gone so well that Sarah was invited to perform at the Tanglewood Music Festival that summer. Her performance there had been reviewed by critics from major newspapers, all of whom praised her extraordinary technique and emotional depth. But the most meaningful support had come from Mrs. Wellington and the other guests from that charity gala night. They had not just written checks and forgotten about Sarah. They had stayed involved, becoming like a family of supporters who wanted to see her succeed. Mrs. Wellington had become particularly close to Sarah. She had insisted that Sarah move out of her family's cramped apartment and into the guest house on Mrs. Wellington's estate. "You need a proper place to practice," she had said, "and I enjoy having music in the house again." The guest house had a beautiful grand piano that had belonged to Mrs. Wellington's late husband. Sarah practiced on it every day, and sometimes Mrs. Wellington would sit and listen, reminding her of the grandmother Sarah had never known. The financial support from the gala guests had solved Sarah's biggest problem. Her family no longer needed her waitress salary to survive. Her father was getting better medical care. Her mother had been able to quit one of her jobs. Her brothers were in good schools and had everything they needed. Sarah had kept her promise to help others too. With Mrs. Wellington's guidance, she had started the Martinez Music Foundation, which provided scholarships and instruments to young musicians from low-income families. The foundation was already helping 30 kids pursue their musical dreams. The recording contract that James Rodriguez had arranged had led to Sarah's first album, Hidden Treasures. The title was perfect because it represented both Sarah's own story and the music of lesser-known composers that she had chosen to feature. The album had received wonderful reviews and had even won a Grammy nomination. But tonight's concert at Carnegie Hall was the biggest milestone yet. Sarah was performing as a solo artist, not as part of a festival or group event. The tickets had sold out within hours of going on sale. People wanted to hear the pianist who had been discovered at a charity dinner and had taken the classical music world by storm. Sarah's parents and brothers were in the audience tonight, sitting in the front row. They were wearing new clothes that Sarah had bought for them, and they looked proud and happy. Her father's health had improved so much that he was able to travel to New York for the concert. Mrs. Wellington was there too, along with many of the other guests from that night at the country club. Dr. Chen had brought a group of his music students. Linda Morrison was there with several other musicians she represented. Even Mr. Thompson had come, wearing his best suit and beaming with pride. The story of Sarah's discovery had become famous in the music world. Magazines had written articles about her. Television shows had done interviews. She had been featured on the cover of Classical Music Today with the headline, "From Waitress to Carnegie Hall, the Sarah Martinez story." But Sarah had not forgotten where she came from or the people who had helped her along the way. She still visited the Grandview Country Club regularly, not as an employee but as a guest performer. The club now displayed posters from her concerts in the lobby, and they had named their annual charity gala the Sarah Martinez Evening of Music. The waitresses and kitchen staff at the club had become some of Sarah's biggest fans. They loved telling new employees about the night when one of their own had sat down at the piano and changed her life forever. It gave them hope that their own dreams might come true someday too. Sarah had also kept her promise to support music education for underprivileged children. Her foundation had grown beyond what anyone had imagined. They now provided instruments, lessons, and scholarships to over 300 young musicians. Sarah performed benefit concerts regularly to raise money for the foundation. Some of the children helped by the foundation were incredibly talented. Sarah often thought about them when she performed, knowing that her success was making their dreams possible too. It was like a circle of hope that kept growing larger. As Sarah stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, she thought about the night that had changed everything. If the original pianist had not gotten sick, none of this would have happened. She would still be carrying trays and hiding her talents. It was amazing how one moment of courage could transform an entire life. The stage manager appeared beside her. "Miss Martinez, it's time." Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. As she stepped into the bright lights, she heard the sound of applause from the packed concert hall. The audience was already excited, even before she had played a single note. She sat down at the magnificent Steinway piano and adjusted the bench. The instrument was perfectly tuned and incredibly responsive. It was the kind of piano that every serious pianist dreams of playing. But as Sarah placed her hands on the keys, she was not thinking about the fancy piano or the famous venue or the important people in the audience. She was thinking about music itself, about the power it had to bring people together, to touch hearts and to change lives. She began to play the same piece she had started with that night at the country club, Clair de Lune by Debussy. It seemed fitting to begin her Carnegie Hall debut with the music that had begun her journey back to her true calling. As the gentle melody filled the concert hall, Sarah felt the same magic she had experienced that night 6 months ago. The connection between performer and audience, the sharing of something beautiful, the way music could make strangers feel like family. The audience listened in complete silence, captivated by Sarah's artistry. In the front row, her parents held hands and smiled through their tears. Mrs. Wellington nodded approvingly. Dr. Chen watched with the pride of a teacher seeing his student succeed. But the most important thing was that Sarah was finally where she belonged. She was no longer hiding her gifts or postponing her dreams. She was living the life she was meant to live, using her talents to bring joy to others and to help young musicians follow their own dreams. When Clair de Lune ended, the applause was thunderous. But Sarah was already moving into her next piece, lost in the joy of making music for people who truly appreciated it. She had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them. Sometimes we have to be brave, enough to step out of the shadows and show the world who we really are. And sometimes when we do that, we discover that the world has been waiting for us all along. The invisible waitress had become a celebrated artist. The hidden talent had been revealed. The dream that had been postponed had finally come true, and this was just the beginning. Sarah Martinez had found her voice again, and she would spend the rest of her life sharing it with the world, one beautiful note at a time.